Jan Bernard created the discrimination model, and it involves what's called a roles and foci matrix, where the supervisor occupies the role of either teacher, counselor, or consultant, and then the supervision focus is either on intervention, personalization, and conceptualization. And it is not a lockstep process with this model. The roles and the foci, they interact and blend both within sessions and, of course, across supervision sessions. And a supervisor acting in the role of teacher is focusing on some of the more didactic issues, instructing supervisees, this is used with supervisees maybe with less experience, and may even take on more traditional teacher roles in assigning homework assignments for the supervisee, perhaps to assign a particular book to read or a video to watch about either the clinical topic at the site or agency, or about a particular clinical intervention, such as child-centered play therapy. A supervisor acting in the role of counselor will focus on, again, not doing therapy with our supervisees, but temporarily facilitating personal reflection on what may be enhancing or detracting from their clinical work with clients. A supervisor acting in this role may also examine the supervisee's emotional reactions to clients, in other words, when their buttons get pushed. For example, some supervisees, especially young trainees, may not want to confront their clients for fear of not being liked. And this would need to be explored in supervision as it pertains to their work with clients. Also, some supervisors operate in the role of consultant. This is more of a collegial relationship, and in this role, the supervisor would focus on mutual problem solving. And when we look at the focus of what happens in the supervision session, intervention focus would include focusing on skills. In other words, what skills or competencies is the supervisee using, or what are they performing? And looking at the impact of the interventions on the client. A focus on personalization would look at the supervisee's personal style. How does the supervisee separate personal boundaries in their clinical work, and separate boundaries from the clinical treatment, and keeping, again, those emotional reactions out of the conceptualization? And finally, the conceptualization focus. This is how does the supervisee think about clients, and how does he or she decide to apply theory, and how do they apply it? How do they think about clients? How do they work to understand them? And that becomes sort of a metacognitive process of thinking about thinking. With that. So I want to put up this slide, which is more of the matrix form of Bernard's discrimination model. And if you look along the left-hand column, the focus of supervision, again, would be intervention, conceptualization, or personalization, whereas the supervisor role across the top may be teacher, counselor, or consultant. A supervisor operating in the role of teacher, focusing on intervention, would perhaps teach a new technique, such as systematic desensitization, to the supervisee. A teacher role focusing on conceptualization might use the session transcripts, have the supervisee transcribe a session, and teach the supervisee to identify themes across client statements within the session. A teacher role focusing on personalization might assign an article regarding proxemics or proximity to address the supervisee's cultural preference for a close seating arrangement that you notice might be impacting the client as they pull back from the supervisee in the session. A supervisor operating in counselor role, focusing on interventions, would help the supervisee determine the effect of a particular client on him or her. For example, let's say this supervisor uses excessive questioning with a particular client and not with others, and so the supervisor would explore that. A counselor role focusing on conceptualization would help the supervisee see her cognitive blocks in goal setting for an unassertive client, and as it relates to the supervisee's own lack of assertiveness. And a counselor role focusing on personalization would help, a supervisor would help the supervisee confront his own resistance to recognizing sexual cues from women when a client is obviously sexually attracted to him. And finally, the role of consultant. Consultant focusing on interventions would, at the supervisee's request, use a metaphor technique, help the supervisee expand the metaphor technique and apply it across different modalities of treatment. Or working in the conceptualization intervention or focus, a supervisor would discuss several case conceptualization models with the supervisee at her request and consider cases from a Gestalt point of view, from an Adlerian point of view, from a narrative point of view. Finally, the consultant acting in a personalization focus might focus on developmental concerns of older adults as the supervisee requests assistance in feeling more comfortable with this topic and working with that particular population. So again, looking at this matrix, you kind of have to, even while you're in the supervisory session, picture this matrix and picture which role you're occupying and where your focus is. And also documenting, when we talk about documenting supervision session, documenting to these different roles and making sure that you're covering each of the foci, but also being aware of which role you operate within. And some roles are, we're more comfortable in some roles, might be more comfortable as teacher, counselor, consultant, but also making sure that we're not omitting anything when we do our supervision sessions. So at this point, we're going to watch a video clip, and in this example, Lori Russell Chapin is going to be demonstrating the discrimination model with her supervisee, Brian. And Brian has been working with a client named Sydney, and Sydney is coping with the death of her mother after a long illness. And after several sessions, she is discussing her mother, and while her counselor, Brian, attempts to focus the session back onto the client. So we're going to pause here and watch a few minutes of Brian's session with Sydney.
He was always very muscular, so all the boys they were afraid of it because he was really broad-shouldered and not a bit heavy. There wasn't an ounce of fat on him during that time. And he did have a very, very bad temper, which I'm sure y'all understand, and my mom did too. But he was also a loving person in his own way. And after he had a stroke, then it came time for Bob to get out of school, and he was getting this offer to come up here. And I didn't know if it was right till he came home, and my mother, the best thing she ever did for me. And I went, cry again. But it's one of the things she gave me that I was able to give my children, was to tell me to go. She said, this is your opportunity, this is your chance. You need to go and see where it leads and what it has. You cannot stay here. This is where the opportunity is, you go. And I think it's because she regretted not having done that, because when my father was in the service, they were in California for a while. She was in San Diego and she loved it. But then when he got out after the war, they went back to Texas, and I think truly her heart for being in San Diego, that was probably the best part of her life. And then they went back to Texas, and his family was a mess. So, they always had that pressure and stuff on. And I think that's why she told me that. And very, very hard to do. My mom used to say, I love you. She and I, in fact, had to go into the bathroom and close the door to say that, when I was leaving. And that always really touched me. But yeah, she and I were just in the bathroom, and she told me, you need to go. You need to mother's choice. You don't stay here. Because of us, we'll take care of ourselves. You need to go away. You need to give yourself a chance and give yourself a life. And Vern says she loved me. I don't think I even knew that's what be like this. But, therefore, it gave me the ability to give my children wings. And I look at the people whose kids, family, the parents are so involved in their lives, even people my age, and still tell them how to run their life. That's not right. We have those children to raise, and then our part and our gift is to give them those wings and let them fly and trust in their abilities.
Let me ask you something here. Where you're at right now in your life, if your mom was sitting here, what would she tell you?
I haven't done that. She was so sick at the end, I miss her more now.
Think
when she first died.
Think about that time that you were just recalling, when she shared that great gift with you of, take this opportunity. You need
I think she would probably tell me to do what I'm doing. Work on me and do it, with it. And, she'd be a cheerleader for me. She would be my father, it'd still be weird. But, she would encourage me.
So now that you've seen Brian work with Sydney, we're going to watch Dr. Russell Chapin work with Brian and implement the discrimination model.
Conceptualization and personalization.
Okay.
And the first one would be, again, Brian, the intention behind, and I thought this was really interesting. You had a chance during the latter part of the tape where you said to her, Sydney, you found out that her mother was a very important part of her life. And there was a point where you said to her, what would your mother think about this? What was your intention behind that?
I think at that point in time, if I remember that correctly, my intention was really to try and help her understand that her mindset, kind of how she tends to look at things, other people are going to have maybe a different way of looking at that, and really to help her get some source of strength and support that her mom would support her. That if she was going to be honest with herself and ask that question to her mom, that she'd kind of be surprised that maybe mom would tell her something, something positive, giving her some strong feedback. She'd always said that her mother was a source of strength for her, somebody that was always tended to be in her corner. And she has a lot of times that she tends to do a lot of self-doubt, not having a lot of confidence in her own abilities or skills. And so what my real goal was really trying to get her to see that that one person who was always there for you would have agreed with what your decision was, would have been there to support you in this situation too.
So to some degree, it was like giving her additional resources that she could use when when she says she's confused and needs additional attention. Let's move to this personalization. This is one of my favorite parts of the tape. You were listening well, Brian, and you were thinking, I could just see the wheels turning. And every once in a while, you'd whip back in your chair and you'd put one finger on your face like this. And then there was a point towards the end of the tape where you put two fingers on the tape and you're leaning back on your chair.
Right.
What was that about? What were you doing?
Well, one of the things, and actually kind of going back to the process, one of the things as far as the examining communication is Cindy was a very verbal client. She talked quite a bit. One of the things that I think I struggled with was keeping her focused, and was part of our supervision question. And she tended to get into a lot of the stories, a lot of storytelling, trying to, I think my interpretation of that was trying to give me some background information so that I could kind of have a sense of where she was coming from. And when I would tend to lean back and do that, really what that was, and as I looked at the tape, I could really tell that that was me kind of settling back and starting to listen to her story. And part of that, in all honesty, was really, okay, we're getting into a story now. And in my mind, I was trying to figure out, how can I get her back to, how can I start to lead this into some process? How can I lead this back into maybe getting back more into affect, things like that? Because with those stories, she really tended to get away from the focus of either the session or maybe a particular issue that was brought up at that point in time.
I also noticed in the tape that at one point, several points, Sydney began to cry. And Brian, I want you to kind of think about this. You do this so well. You reflected several times, but at one point, she started to cry, and you very quickly got her out of that and asked her a question. What do you think might be behind that for you?
I think part of that probably would be my desire to kind of really start to maybe identify some issues, because I know that I was frustrated at times during this session, because I saw that there was a lot of avenues that we could go down, that we could explore, that tended to, and I guess in my mind, kind of got sidetracked a little bit with some stories. So I think part of my intention behind doing that, or unconscious intention, I guess, was really to trying to get back to exploring maybe some connections between some of these past behaviors, past patterns of thinking, things like that. And so I think that was at the expense of really being able to maybe explore some of that affect.
Because I was wondering too, and it goes back to the supervisory question, if we're back, very much what we did in developmental supervision, it's asking you to be genuine. I wondered,
Right.
didn't know this, but occasionally when you were like this, I knew what you were trying to do, but I wondered if the client would think, and you were so good at, honestly, Brian, listening to her, but I sensed a little bit, you said frustration, I even sensed a little bit of, this may not be right, boredom to some degree. Like, how do I get her out of this content and move her back into process and affect? And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be wise for you to maybe just share. Sydney, I'm frustrated a little bit because, you know, you are so verbal and I love hearing you talk, but every time I get into the feeling, you kind of back away.
Yeah.
So I see a theme here as we go through these different models even, Brian. I see the theme of asking you to be as genuine with your clients as possible. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And after reviewing the tape, I could certainly tell that as well. That I think that I would have added a great deal to the session and really to our rapport. And like you had said earlier about the trust. But I was apprehensive about doing that for fear of what could happen if she didn't feel that I was interested in what she had to say. So I do believe there was certainly part of behind some of her storytelling was to try and help me understand. But I do agree that a lot of that was defocusing in a sense and getting away from maybe some of those painful feelings in that.